This video shows my process for mounting a rifle scope. A lot of people are afraid to mount their own scopes and often pay a gunsmith to do it. There's no need for that. If you can use a screwdriver and a level, you can mount your own scope. In this video, I'm going to be installing a scope on this rifle. I'll be installing this scope here. I'm going to mount it on this Ruger American in 223. Now this rifle already came with a rail, came with it installed from the factory. What I've already done is I've removed this rail. I've reinstalled the screws using some blue Loctite. That's blue Loctite, not red. And I've torqued them to 35 inch-pounds. So I've got the rings here that I'm going to install. I'm going to roughly place the rings where I want to put them. Snug them up a little bit. I may move these as the process continues. But I've got them roughly where I want them. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually place the scope in there and try and adjust the eye relief. So I've placed the scope roughly where I want it in the rings, and everything is loosely installed. Nothing is tightened down right now. I'm not going to do that until after I've got that eye relief properly set up on the scope. Once I do that, then I'll work on tightening it down. But this is approximately where I'm going to put it, and nothing's tightened down so I can move around a lot. I've also verified that the objective of the scope is not touching the barrel anyway. So I've got plenty of space there. Also, I've already made sure that when the bolt is up, it doesn't interfere with the scope at all. The important thing to note, the bolt has already been removed. I've removed the magazine, and of course I've verified the rifle is unloaded. Always only work on rifles when they're unloaded. So to adjust the eye relief, I'm going to shoulder the rifle just like I would if I was shooting it. And I'm going to make sure that I have proper eye relief. I'm going to move the scope back and forth, make sure I don't get any tunnel vision. Make sure the crosshairs are right where they should be. Ideally, you want it as far forward as possible. But that looks pretty good right there. So something I like to do once I get the eye relief set where I want it, so I'll take a pencil and I'll just lightly mark here where the rings fit over the scope. Because I'm going to be taking it off here a little bit, and that way it makes it very easy for me to get it back in the proper eye relief position. Again, I want to point out, you want to make sure that your rings are not up onto the objective or too far back here towards the back of the scope. And you want to make sure you're centered on the tubular part of the scope. That way you tighten the rings more consistently and get a better grip on the tube. And here you can see one of the pencil marks I put on the tube. That just makes it easy to make sure I get it right back in the position I want it for proper eye relief should it move a little bit during the process. Now that I've got my scope placement figured out, next I'm going to tighten down the thumb screws on the lower part of the rings here, which is attaching the rings to the rail. The manufacturer's specifications say to tighten them to between 25 and 30 inch-pounds. So I'm going to adjust that here on the torque wrench. Put it to 30. It's 30 inch-pounds. I'm just going to tighten them. Tighten them until I hear a click. For scope leveling, I use the Wheeler kit. It's got the two-piece level system here. I'm going to mount that on the rifle and use it to level the scope. First I'm going to put the barrel clamp level assembly on the barrel. And there it is installed. So now after placing my barrel level on the front of the barrel, I'm now going to have to remove my scope so that I can level the rifle using the reference level. I'm going to find a flat place on the receiver, place the level, and then I'm going to level the rifle in the vise. And there we go, the rifle is now level in the vise according to the reference level. Now once I've leveled the rifle in the vise using the reference level, I'm going to go forward to the level on the barrel, and I'm going to use that screw to adjust the level until it is level. At that point, this level and this level should both match each other. Alright, so now both levels match and the rifle is level in the vise, and that level is also matching this level. Here you can see the reference level on top of the receiver. That's showing that the rifle is level in the vise. And here you can see the level on the barrel has also been leveled. So both levels match each other now. Now I'm going to have to remove the reference level to install the scope. And that's fine because we've already adjusted the level on the barrel. So from this point on, that level up there is going to serve as a reference for verifying that the rifle is level in the vise. Now I've placed the scope back in the rings using my earlier pencil marks as a reference point to make sure I get it back in the right position so my eye relief is the way I want it. At this point I have not tightened the scope rings down tightly. It's still loose. I can still move the scope around. And that's so that I can level the scope. So I can move it back and forth to level it. So I'm going to use the reference level, now placing it on a flat surface on the scope in order to level the scope within the rings. And remember, the rifle is still level, and I'm able to verify that because of the level that's on the barrel. And now I'm going to use this reference level on top of the scope to move the scope until the scope is roughly level. At that point, then I'm going to begin to tighten the screws down while watching the level to make sure it doesn't move. And I'm going to tighten them down, not so that you eliminate the gap, so there actually should be a fairly even gap on either side, but I'm going to tighten it down until the scope doesn't move anymore. Now the manufacturer's specification are 15 inch-pounds, which isn't a lot. You don't want to put too much pressure on the scope tube. Make sure it's level. I'm going to slowly tighten these, just going back and forth, always referencing the level, making sure nothing moves. Remember, you are not trying to eliminate the gap here. There should be some amount of gap. So if you find yourself getting very tight on one side, you want to make sure that you tighten it down the other side and even out those gaps. So this gap here is a little bigger than this side, so I'm going to tighten this one down a little bit more. Keep in mind the whole time I'm watching that level to make sure nothing moves. Alright, that looks good. Now you may have to move it around a little bit. Sometimes if you tighten one side too much, it'll roll the scope and you'll move your level. You have to loosen things back up and readjust. I had to do that a little bit here. But when it's all done, of course you want your level to still be level, and you should see a slight gap, roughly even on all four sides. All four gaps should be roughly even, but you want to see a little bit of gap. You're not trying to tighten it down till you close the gap. So a little bit of a gap is normal. So here you can see the reference level is still level. You can also see I have a slight gap in my rings there. There you can see a close-up view of the gap. Here you can also see the level on the end of the barrel is still level. So both the reference level and the barrel level are matching. And again, we've got our rings tightened down with a slight gap on every ring. So the manufacturer's specifications say to tighten the top screws down to 15 inch-pounds. There I've got my torque wrench set to approximately 15 inch-pounds. I'm going to go tighten these. Again, I'm watching the level to make sure it doesn't move as I tighten it. If you ever notice the level move, you're going to have to take the screws out and do this over again. Alright, that one's 15. Alright, that one's 15. Alright, 15. There we go on that one. So here you can see the reference level is still level after tightening all the screws down to 15 inch-pounds. You can also see a slight gap in the rings. And if we look at our barrel level, you can see that it's still level. And that's telling us that the rifle is still level in the vise, and that the scope is now level to the rifle. And that means that the crosshairs of the scope should now be approximately level to the bore. Now I just need to remove the levels, and the scope is mounted. So now that the scope is mounted, take out a vise. I'm going to shoulder the rifle, look through it, make sure those crosshairs look like they should. Make sure my eye relief is still in the right place. And make sure that the crosshairs appear level. And they do. One thing I like to do is you can point the rifle at, like, say, some kind of parallel line, line up the crosshairs to it and see if it appears roughly level. It's a good way to check it. But this looks pretty good. So now I've reinstalled the bolt, just making sure I can work it, doesn't interfere with the scope at all. Everything looks good there. Again, crosshairs are level. Looks like this scope has been mounted successfully. And I think it's good to go. And one thing I like to do that's totally unnecessary, but I like to do it, is I take a white paint marker and I put little witness marks on my screws just so I can tell if they've ever loosened up. I also like to keep the pencil marks on my scope. If you don't want to keep them there, you can just use a little alcohol to wipe them off. But I like to keep them there just so I can also see if the scope has ever shifted in the rings at all.